Welcome to Psych Sessions on Teaching and Learning Centers. My name is Chris Hackala, and I'm your podcast host. In this series of conversations, we speak with folks who have made the leap from a traditional faculty member position to a role in a center for teaching and learning. The conversations focus on how individuals moved from faculty to a center and how that move impacted their work, their career trajectory, and their personal and professional identity. Along the way, we talk about tips, advice, and challenges that come from working in a center. Sit back and enjoy these chats on Psych Sessions on Teaching and Learning Centers.
I'm talking to Lindsay Masland today from Appalachian State University in Boone, North Carolina. As I say Boone, North Carolina, I almost have a little accent there, which I don't know why, just feels right. And Lindsay's associate professor of psychology and the associate director for faculty development in their Center for Teaching and Learning at Appalachian State. And I'm sure they probably have a fancy name, but I'm just going to call it the Center for Teaching and Learning. But thanks for coming today, Lindsay.
Thanks for having me, Chris. And I have to give you a gold star for pronouncing Appalachian correctly. It's not Appalachian, it is Appalachian. So good job.
Well, I have a former colleague who went down there, and when she took the job, she was very clear to me that it was Appalachian State, because I did call it. I said it wrong. I don't want to say it wrong because then it'll get stuck in my head, but I'll always try to get it right. So, well, thanks, Lindsay, and I appreciate you coming in and having time to talk with us. As we have really started to evaluate and look at these kinds of issues in this podcast, one of the things that we really are interested in is how people go from faculty positions where they're focused mostly on teaching into doing faculty development work. And I'm just sort of curious. I mean, everybody comes at it from a different perspective and they have different pathways. I'm wondering if you can sort of lay out a little bit of your pathway for how you went from teaching your courses. And I know you taught your teaching of psych course, which you really love, and your undergraduate courses, to doing more faculty development. If you can sort of walk us through some of that, that'd be great.
Sure. So, I mean, I've always been a person that's really interested in the teaching piece of an academic job. Of course, I think research is important as well, but just from my earliest experiences teaching, like guest lecturing when I was getting a master's degree and stuff like that, I had this feeling that like, okay, this is maybe what I'm good at. This is what I love. So I was always interested in that. And so when I started as an assistant professor at App State, so this would have been 10 years ago in 2011, I just started taking advantage of all the things that our Center for Teaching and Learning was offering. Ours is called the Center for Academic Excellence. Yeah. But, and so I just went to a lot, and it was mostly workshop based at that time, like one-off workshops. So I just went to a lot of workshops because I was just thinking, I'm kind of obsessed with teaching. I want to do this the best I can. So I just went to a lot of them and had kind of an interesting experience because, although they may have been telling us about technologies that I hadn't learned about before, that happened to be available here that maybe weren't available in my PhD program or something, although that piece might have been new, all of the intro stuff that they would always do before teaching us the nitty gritty, I was like, wait, I know all of this already, because it would be things like, well, here's a theory of motivation, and this is how motivating humans works. And I'd be like, oh, yeah, I know this. Or here's how learning works, or this is how the attention system functions. And I was just realizing, oh, wow, I know all the background stuff. And then I'm just learning, the technology. So that was kind of a moment of like, oh, wow, I didn't realize that this is what faculty development would be. So that's probably where it started. So
let me ask you, and it's actually really interesting insight, because I think a lot of us in psychology come to that realization when we start to see some of the work done in teaching and learning. A lot of it has to do with concepts that we've talked about and discussed in our grad programs. Did you do any of this work as a graduate student? Was there any teaching, any courses, and where did you go?
Okay, so I got my PhD at the University of Georgia. My PhD is, the official thing on my transcript, I guess, is educational psychology, but that was really more an artifact of the naming of the department, because it's truly a school psychology PhD. So I was being trained to be the person in a K through 12 setting that is working with teachers, that is assessing students for learning needs, stuff like that. Like that's what the program was. And I also had a minor in methodology and statistics. So like that's my PhD background. Interestingly, in a school psych PhD, you don't learn educational psychology. which seems weird, but it's just so focused to, everything that's happening in a school system. It's not really about, basic science of teaching and learning and stuff like that. So that was not part of my coursework. But I did want a TA. So a couple of years in, I applied to be a TA, and because I was in a school psych program, all of the TA positions were connected to the College of Education. And specifically, there's only one thing you could teach, and it was psychology applied to teaching and learning. So it was the educational psychology class that all of the pre-service teachers, the education majors, the undergrad education majors had to take.
Okay.
So that was the only thing you could teach. And so that's what I taught, but I had to learn educational psychology in the process of teaching it, because that wasn't part of my, it wasn't part of my master's degree in experimental psych for sure. And then it was not part of my PhD in school psych. So I was kind of learning it, and I loved it. I loved the content. I saw how it connected to all of the other, to learning, to emotion, to motivation. I saw that, but it was just this other level. So that's probably where it started, and where I started being introduced to some of the concepts that end up being used in faculty development, but it was just focused on K-12. So that's how. So
it's really interesting. So your degree, is it from the psych department at University of Georgia, or an ed psych department, or a school psych department?
So it was from, at the time, it was called Educational Psychology and Instructional Technology, but it was in the College of Ed. So it was not where the psych department is. We did take some classes, and so I took neuroscience and psychopharm over there, but it was in College of Ed.
Yeah, it's so interesting because as I talk to people come from such different backgrounds with such different experiences and end up in this field. And what's ironic is you're one of the first people that I've spoken to who comes from an education background to some degree, because most people don't. So I think that's really interesting. And I think the way that they structured it really is so telling of the way that we really, I think we really compartmentalize things. And I think that by doing that, we lose a lot by restricting what it is people have access to. And I props to you for going out and looking for other experiences, because, a lot of people don't get those experiences, and they don't understand the whole teaching and learning process, that it really does apply across lots of different ways. And what you have to do is kind of think about how you can take what you know and apply it across different contexts. So that's really great. So you end up at App State, and you're teaching, and you're actually teaching a course that you took that you really liked that I think you taught it in grad school too.
Yeah, so I taught it in grad school, and the first classes that I was given, we had a reduced load our very first semester for tenure track early career folks. And so I think I only maybe taught 2 classes that were that psychology applied to teaching and learning. So I was really lucky that the class I taught as a TA was the first class I taught as a tenure track faculty member. It's a different state, so it's different regulations and stuff like that. But so that was nice. And that is the course that I have taught the most in my 10 years. I've probably taught now, I don't know, about 38 sections of it, 40 sections of it. So I am well rehearsed in educational psychology content now.
And that's a grad course, I assume.
No, so that one is an undergrad course. So I'm still working with future teachers in that class. But I do also teach the teaching of psychology class, which is for our graduate TAs in the psychology department.
Okay, so you're deeply involved in this in a lot of different ways, in ways that a lot of people they don't have that experience. The K through 12 world, I think, is really an interesting addition to it as well. My wife is a K through 12 teacher, and some of the things I hear about the K through 12 world is very different than what we experience in higher education. Not with regard to how people learn. There's developmentally appropriate teaching strategies and all of that, but it's just a different. I don't know if beast is the right word, but it's a different animal. Some of the things my wife says that happen in her public school, I sort of shake my head at and think, wow, but then I tell her things about higher ed and she shakes her head at us. And so I think it's interesting for you to have that experience in both worlds. So anyway, enough of a digression. Can you tell us a little bit about, so you were attending workshops at App State, you started to see the kind of things that you were interested in. How did you make that transition from going to doing that kind of work?
Sure. So I was doing all those workshops, and then I signed up to participate in a longer professional development activity, not much longer. It was 5 days instead of, like 1 hour or 1 day. But it was a course redesign institute that was happening in May, like after grades had been submitted. And you had to apply. You got paid a little bit of money just as a faculty member, right? As a participant to design or redesign a course fully using backward design model, that kind of stuff. So I was just a participant in that, but it let me see, 5 whole days of like all the different ways you could do faculty development and me being witness to so many of my colleagues' light bulb moments in that work and my own, of course, it was just like, wow, this is really fun. And I started to realize, I was like, this feels like the best parts of teaching, because you're there when you're seeing the light bulb moments, but it's missing one of the toughest parts of teaching, which is that accountability, power dynamic between like the teacher and the learner, like that's kind of just gone here. I still had to do my work in order to get paid, my contract, but I wasn't getting like an A or a B based on that kind of stuff was just gone. I was like, whoa. So it had a different feel to it. So I was really interested in it and really just loved it and kind of was lit up by it. It was like, I got to figure out how to do more of this. And so the way that I did that was, they asked us to fill out a survey at the end about the experience and what we learned and our recommendations. And, there's always a box at the bottom of the survey that's like, any other comments? And so my other comment was like, FYI, if you ever need somebody to assist with anything like related to this course redesign or in the center, I would be happy to do that. And I said, I just have this background as an educational psychologist. And so I feel like I could offer that angle, that kind of learning science angle, because I learned really quickly that they love it when you use the phrase learning science, which is basically how we as psychologists think about the whole darn thing, right? But it's like a fancy term in that world. And I was like, I can help you with that piece. And so I just said that. And then I just kept going to workshops. But when it came around the next year for that Course Redesign Institute to happen, the facilitator reached out and was like, hey, you said this. Do you want to be on the facilitation team? And I was like, yes.
Yeah.
So that's so I can't necessarily recommend just do that, because who knows if that will work at other institutions. But I think the message is just telling people that, one, you have expertise that could be helpful, and two, you're willing to serve in that capacity. Because that's the thing about faculty development, it is a service thing, right?
Yeah,
it's not about accolades or any of that. It's about you serving faculty. And so if you just say, I am here and willing, use me, that worked for me.
So that's that kind of approach is the kind of approach I think some of us have gotten into. If you've ever had a conversation with Todd Zakryzek, he kind of did the same thing. And I think that's an approach a lot of us take. Now, let me ask you, in your center, how big is it at App State? How many folks? Is there a full-time center director? And are there faculty? So what's the structure like?
Sure. And I should say that we had a major change structurally and organizationally between the time I was just talking about when I was first doing workshops and stuff to what we have now. But so I'll just say the structure now. So we, App State is 20,000 students, grad and undergrad. And over 1,000 faculty members.
Wow.
And and so what we have, our center has 3 directors. So we have a director of faculty development, we have a director of learning technology services, and then we have a director of inclusive excellence. And those 3 folks kind of sit equally on the org chart for the whole center. And then underneath that, there might be things like coordinators or associate directors like myself. So I belong to the faculty development side. But all of them are underneath the same umbrella, and we work very closely to each other. We're at all each other's meetings. We always have. So that's really functional and nice, but we do have a lot of people, because like in the learning technology services thing, there's a director. And then underneath that, there's like 10 instructional technology consultants that are assigned to each of the colleges and the university, people who have expertise in our learning management system, all that.
So who do they report up to? So the three directors, they go up to the provost or up to an associate vice president or something like that?
Yeah, they go up to a vice provost. It used to be vice provost of faculty affairs, but they're changing the title to vice provost. Ooh, it's like vice provost of faculty development and something else. There's some other letter. They just changed it like this week. It's
just interesting because, so for context, so you understand, my school has 2,500 students. And we have about 204, we have 204 full-time faculty. But then again, the center is reasonably scaled. I mean, it's me, I have 2 graduate associates, and the instructional design team reports through my office, but they kind of do their own thing. So we're much smaller. And so some of those pieces you talk about, my center handles all of that, which essentially means me, because I'm the only one here. So it is interesting. And I'm not saying it's harder or different. It's really interesting. And one of the things I'm learning is all of the ways that centers really marshal their resources. So it sounds like your directors are full-time directors. They're not faculty, they're full-time directors.
They are full-time directors in terms of their workload, but at least, I'm trying to think if this is true, for at least 2/3 of them came from faculty. Positions first. So they both of them were internal hires. We have had external hires in these positions, but the 2 that are currently, at least an inclusive excellence director and the faculty development director, were faculty previously, and they smartly retained their faculty status. So they are still tenured faculty. In fact, and one of them was a professor at that level. The other one was at assistant professor and still is going up through the ranks, even though she's not teaching, I don't think.
And that's there's a lot of debate about that. And I will say this is my opinion. I'm a full-time director, but I still carry professor of psychology title and status because I think it's really important. Also, I still teach, and I don't know about your directors, but I think there is something to be said for being involved in a way that the faculty can identify your skill set. I was an outside hire. So for me, coming in and teaching was really important so that people knew that I could do it. Internal hire is a little different, but I do think it's an interesting way to run your center. And I think that your piece of it, using your expertise, is really going to benefit the faculty. But let me ask you this. Has it had an impact on the way that you feel like you're perceived by your colleagues, your department, the institution? Has it changed your professional identity at all?
Yeah. So when I first got involved, I'd say no, because I was still just doing one-off workshops or institutes. And so I didn't have any official label I could put on my CV. I mean, I had individual workshops I could list in service, but there wasn't anything under my positions yet. Right. Then when we had a bit of a shakeup in our center, we actually had an outside audit, like somebody come in, assess our functioning, give recommendations, hired a new direct center and not just be doing one-off things. And so I approached the person who received the job and said, hey, I've been doing this. Let me know if you need somebody to be more involved. I can be that person for you. So that's how I got my first official labeled thing. I was the early career programs coordinator.
Okay.
And when I was at that level, which it was really just a stipend position, it didn't give me any course buyout stuff. It was just an extra stipend, like contracts for very specific activities. When I did that, my identity didn't change. I still saw myself as primarily like a psychology professor. But then I guess it was a year and a half ago, they got permission from the vice provost to add an associate. Well, it was an assistant director at the time, assistant director of faculty development. So I'd be working directly under the director. And that was a whole job search process. It was internal, but I still had to do a whole job talk, full application, all the interviews, all that, which I didn't have to do that for anything up until that point, all the workshops, all the little coordinator stuff. So this is the first time it was like legit. And so I got that position, and that position is supposed to come with a 2-course buyout per semester. So we're on a 3 load. And so I'm supposed to be on a 1-1 load. And so it's just a different pot of money paying my department for those two. I'm actually on a 2-2 load because they need me to teach certain classes. Nobody else can teach some of the things I happen to teach. So, but all of that is to say is that in my head, on paper, I actually kind of should belong more to the Center for Teaching and Learning, right? Just based on workload on my contract. But what's actually happening is maybe a little bit more 50%. So I don't have a really clear answer to that. But I will say, I feel like my department is skeptical because I have kind of fragmented my energy. My, alliance is the wrong word, but like my connections. So I will kind of admit that I think I don't want to say they were surprised when I applied for this, but maybe disappointed, wish I hadn't, because it did make things harder, right? Because now there's course coverage issues, like totally get it. But so I think, I'm kind of split in half. I mean, I'd say personally, I see myself more as a faculty developer these days. But I do have, kind of equal in terms of workload.
Yeah, it's interesting. So as you're talking, it sounds like, and you're the first person I've spoken to who sounds like you do a similar thing that I feel like I do. I mean, I'm a full-time administrator, like I said, but I teach. I'm doing 3 courses in the fall and 2 in the spring. And I do it because that identity is really hard for me to shake. And I think that one of the things as you're talking is that, I mean, I identify as the center director. That's who I am. And that's what people see me on campus as. But I actually still do a full evaluation of my work as a faculty member through the psych department, as well as a full evaluation of my work with my boss, who's the senior associate vice president of academic affairs. And I do it to maintain both because I think it helps me feel connected. But it's a bifurcating kind of experience, and sometimes it's challenging. And I'll just be curious: do you have an office in both locations, or you just maintain one office? Because I'm fortunate to only have one office. 2 offices is actually hard.
So this is just a fluke, but the building, the psychology department building, and then the building that the CTL is in are like less than 10 feet apart. To the right, they're separate buildings, but they are next to each other. And we have a big campus with the 20,000 students, right? So that was just a fluke. I only have one office that's officially mine that like has my junk in it. And that is my psychology one that I've always had. But there are conference rooms and things that I will like post up in over in the other building, sometimes for entire days. So that kind of feels like my office, but officially I only have one. Yeah.
Okay. So as you think about your professional identity, there is that professional identity on campus. What about off campus? Have you found that you now have to sort of think about, say, conferences you attend and the kinds of things you talk about? Because I think that's also, I mean, I'll couch this in this. I was, I'm older than you, and you weren't in psychology at the time, but there was a time where I was on executive committee for STP. I was involved in lots of things in STP, and I faded some of my my time in STP when I moved into center directorship because it became more challenging for me to do it. I'm actually moving back into that world a little bit now, but it's taken me a little bit of time to find that balance. And so I'm just curious about how you feel about all this.
Sure. Yeah. Well, so I've been in academia for 10 years, but I really only found STP maybe 5 years ago. So even that's relatively new for me. And then, I mean, I think I probably started offering workshops at least before I even discovered STP, to be honest.
Okay.
But just, here and there kind of thing. I'd have to go look at my CV to figure out the chronology of that. But and then once I found STP, it was like full head on, like I'm obsessed with this world, and I am still in that place. And I think I can stay in that place because I am an associate director, not a director.
Mm-hmm.
And so I don't have full responsibility for literally everything that happens on the campus. And so I can pick and choose what I'm going to take as mine. And I can make those choices align really nicely with whatever my expertise is or what my research is, that kind of stuff. Whereas if I were a full director, you got to do all of it, the stuff that you love and the stuff that you don't love. And so like, I think I might have to back off there, but I'm not, I mean, I'm directing the annual conference on teaching and I'm on a presidential task force and, so for SCP, stuff like that. So I've definitely not backed off, but I know what you're saying because there was this kind of in-between year where I tried to go to both all the teaching conferences and I tried to go to things like POD. And my chair definitely said at my annual review, you went to too many conferences. And I was like, okay. So that was a little bit transitional. So now I'm just trying to figure out, like which conferences do I go to? But I'll say professionally, no, I still belong to STP right now. And I go to things like POD or considering like Lilly conferences and stuff like that, like as an add-on. And that's fine right now. If I ever wanted to be a center director, things would have to shift. I know that's true.
It does. And it doesn't have to shift completely. I mean, it's a lot and you have to find your balance. So, I mean, as I said, I'm trying to move back. I'm on a presidential task force for STP and I'm presenting at ACT. And this is my first time at ACT that it's been called ACT. I was there when it was called Best Practices. It's been that long. And so it is, but it is an interesting kind of shift. And it's a whole different world with a different literature and a different group of people. And the conference feel is different. I mean, we could spend a little bit of time because you and I we met at POD. We ended up sitting next to each other at a dinner. And I think we were making fun of the speaker. It maybe, I don't know for sure. It might have been. But I do know that POD is a different conference than a lot of other conferences. There's a different sort of vibe to it and it takes a little bit to adjust to. And I'm not saying good or bad. It's just very different. It's very different. And especially when you walk in and you don't know anyone. It's very different when you walk in, you don't know anyone.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's such a contrast for if your thing you're using for comparison is an STP related conference. So if you're using ACT or NITOP as your kind of benchmark, and then you go into POD, which is also just huge. It's much more like the APA conference or something like that, where it's just huge. So you've got that difference. And you might feel like you have your groups and stuff in the one, and then you go into the other one and it's just like, what's going on? So that's different. But the other thing that's different too about faculty development is there's this whole piece of organizational knowledge that you need, institutional knowledge, that unless you're an IO psychologist, you don't have that. I think most, psychology PhDs do not have that piece of organizational functioning. And so I think that also drives it a little bit because there's just this whole different vocabulary that you would not have picked up through your psychology PhD. So that's another thing that's kind of different.
Yeah. Interesting. So as you think about this movement in your career and you talk to other people now, you're still early career, but at some point, and I guarantee, Lindsay, it's going to happen and it's going to surprise you because I don't know if I've told the story here before, but I do remember talking to Barney Bynes once and saying to Barney, well, Barney, as an early career psychologist, and he just looked at me and shook his head and said, Chris, you're squarely mid-career now. And I was stunned, but I realized, well, I'm 42 years old. Yeah, I'm kind of mid-career at this point. As you move into this and you have to start thinking about what direction your career is going to go in and what moves you might make, what kinds of things are you thinking about? Are you thinking you might want to be a center director? Are you thinking you might want to stay where you are? And you don't have to answer any of this. I'm just sort of curious about your thoughts and I'd also be curious to think what you would tell someone else as they're moving into this. What is a positive, what you didn't expect, that sort of thing. Because and I'll just say this, just to give you a little context, you talked about the responsibilities. The budget is terrible. It's a terrible thing to deal with, not because it's hard to balance the money. It's money, right? I pay my bills, but it's how do you allocate this money in a way that's fair and equitable across faculty it's the part that keeps me up at night. And so if I were going to give advice to anybody, I'd say, listen, try to learn to understand the complexities of budgeting and how to navigate that piece, because it's the part of my job that I like the least and the part that eats up some of my time. So what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, well, so you were kind of alluding that I was still early career, but technically, according to the STP definition, I am no longer early career.
Well, you're associate professor now, so you are.
Well, I'm also associate, but also once you get past 10 years,
okay, yes,
that's when STP stops counting it as that. So I'm technically already there.
There
and
you
also,
go.
Since you mentioned an age, I will turn 40 next week.
Whoa, happy birthday. You're going to turn 40 next week. Woo.
Yeah. But anyways, so I'm kind of already there in some ways. And I don't have it all figured out yet, kind of what I see future wise. I mean, so the institution that I'm at is very supportive of teaching excellence. And we're also starting to do a lot of great work on inclusive excellence and equity and inclusion and things like that. And so all of those things really resonate with me. So I have no discontent with my current institution. It's also a beautiful place to live and to raise a family. So this place works really well for us. And this current associate director job works really well for me to be able to do things like have outside professional service commitment. So like the balance is really good right now.
Yeah, that's fantastic.
So that's where I'm at. I also have no idea how long my current director will want to stay in her position. And it could be a long time. Or I could also see her going into vice provost type stuff. So who knows, like if that happens, that may force my hand sooner in making a decision about, whether I'd want to go for that. I do see myself being a center director, hopefully, but I have no idea if that would definitely be at App State or not, because I do like the idea of a smaller institution, but I don't want to leave App State. So, I mean, that's just the candid answer to that. I think I have the background to be able to do it. For example, so you were mentioning the budget thing. Couldn't agree more. And I learned that hardcore when I served as the chair of a board of directors for a charter school. And so we had a $1.7 million budget that I had ultimate responsibility for. And so like I've been in those weeds before. And then I, of course, see those weeds now as associate director. And like you said, that's the worst part. And so that would be the hesitation for me is why would I want to do more of the yucky stuff? So that's kind of where I'm at. The other thing, I mean, I'm working on a book and stuff like that. And so my concern is that if I were to take on more administrative things that the time's got to come from somewhere. And I'm not ready to give up my STP commitments or that kind of personal scholarship stuff. So I'm real good right now.
And that's great. And I mean, I can tell you, we all make these choices based on all kinds of things. And I don't know how much you know about my career path, but I've switched jobs. I've actually had, if you can imagine, I've had 3 jobs, 0 moves. I found 3 different jobs within a driving distance to where I live. It's New England, so there's a lot of schools up here, but I've been very fortunate with regard to not having to uproot my family and yet still climb into positions that I wanted to move into. So, and these are personal choices, right? I mean, I think that I didn't mean to make you feel like you do what you're going to do. The idea is to see, what do you think? Because I'll tell you this, at 40, I was going to retire as a full professor because I had gotten full professor. I think I got full professor like 38. And I was like, that's it, man. I'm riding this into the sunset. I'm going to publish some books. I'm going to do this stuff. And I didn't see this job coming down the pike. I was running a 40. Where was I? 40. Yeah. I was doing what you were doing. I was running a couple of small workshops. And then I think when I was 42, I started a small center when I was 42. But it was a 1-course reduction center. At an institution. And I didn't know what was going to lead. So I do think it's hard to predict. I think one of the things that is curious about it, though, is that as we all go through these different patterns and we try to sort of navigate it, it is a thing. And I think you said it so nicely, is that no matter what, when you make a shift in what you're currently doing, time has to come from somewhere. And you have to think about how you value your activities in your life and what it is where you need to pull that time from. And I think that kind of advice is really good for people who want to go into this position and know that that there's a lot of great things about doing this. And you're in an interesting position because I assume you're on a 9-month contract, even though you do the faculty development. Yeah. So you have your summers off still you're not off. And I don't mean it in that negative way, but you're not like, I'm here every day in my office from whenever I get here to whenever I leave, year round. And that's not the case for you.
No, but because I am still a faculty position, that being said, when I got this associate director position, the only way they could work it out kind of at the vice provost level was to not give me any kind of raise. Yay. So what we figured out, though, is that the way to kind of make that happen, or honestly, to just keep me at the level of back when I had been getting stipends for random stuff, was to give me a bunch of stipends in the summer.
Yeah.
So although my contract is 9 months, I have different contracts. Like I am on 4 different contracts right now. Yeah. In the summer. So, but yes, it is true that I have way more flexibility than somebody whose actual designation is staff.
Yeah. And that's an interesting trade-off, right? So, and I get vacation time and things like that, which I'm terrible about keeping track of that stuff because I still remember before I did this 20 plus years as a faculty member. So to go from that world to this world was actually, I mean, you can tell, this is a podcast, but Lindsay and I are on Zoom. I'm not dressed the way a lot of administrators dress. I'll just say that. For people who know the way academics dress, that academics they're not always fancy. And I think that there's a lot of these sort of transitioning things. But I think that it's great that you found that balance, and I really appreciate your passion for teaching and your willingness to share that passion with other people. And passion alone is great, but passion with knowledge is even better. And you have the background and the experience and the expertise. And I love that you have the K through 12 stuff because I think it's an underappreciated piece of education that a lot of higher ed folks they're not aware of, and they don't understand the importance of. It doesn't have to be aligned, but awareness of what's happening, so that we're better able to respond to what happens with our students. So I really appreciate that, and I wanted to thank you for your time. It was a great chatting with you, and I really appreciate you taking the time to talk to me.
Sure, it was great to talk to you as always, Chris.
Thanks.